All right, in this video, we're going to talk about one of the greatest suburban areas to live in all of the Portland metro area. If you want to learn more about what it's like to live in Bull Mountain in Tigard, Oregon, stay tuned to learn more. Hey, what's up everybody? This is Paul Clem with the Oregon relocation team coming to you from Bull Mountain, Oregon today. And if this is your first time to the channel living in Oregon, and if you want to get more videos like this, make sure to hit the subscribe button, tap the little bell to get notified every time we drop a new video. Now, Bull Mountain is a census designated place basically in Tigard, Oregon. A lot of Bull Mountain is in Tigard city limits. A lot of Bull Mountain is unincorporated Washington County, but it's all basically going to be Tigard. Most of it serves the Tigard School District, so you're going to end up in Tigard High School and Tigard schools. Unless you're on the north side of Bull Mountain, you can get into some of the Beaverton School District and get into the new Mountainside High School on the north side of Bull Mountain. But basically, this area is going to be considered Tigard. Now, Tigard is a huge suburb on the west side of Portland that is just south of Beaverton, just north of Tualatin. It's on the west side of the I-5 corridors. And really here where we are in Bull Mountain, you're just north of Sherwood, Oregon. So Sherwood is a smaller, more kind of rural feeling suburb, about as far south and west as you can get in the Portland metro area. So Bull Mountain is going to be really far south and west in the Portland metro area. And because of that, you can get a little bit buried in this area. I think for a lot of people moving to Portland, Oregon, looking for a nice suburban area, Bull Mountain is going to check a ton of boxes. There's definitely some downsides to living in this area, but there's a ton of upside as well. And stick around to the end because we're actually going to talk about the pros and cons of living in Bull Mountain, some of those upsides and some of the downsides. What are some of the sacrifices living in this area? But one thing for sure is that Bull Mountain is a relatively recently developed area. So most of the development here has taken place in the last 30 years. You can get some older homes. We'll talk more about that, but most of this is newer development starting from the 90s on. So a lot of nice, big, large, newer homes. It has kind of an upscale feel overall in that way. There's also some new construction going on here, and I'm here at the River Terrace crossing, this River Terrace area. There's about a half a dozen builders building here where I am today, a little bit west of here, and there are some one-off little developments throughout Bull Mountain as well. So Bull Mountain, being south and west in the metro area, is butting up against that urban growth boundary, and as that's expanded, that's created the opportunity for more development in this area. If you look at an aerial view of a map of Bull Mountain, you'll see a lot of undeveloped land, especially west and south, where you start to get out into more rural areas. So this is an area that is continuing to develop and will continue to develop for quite some time. Now, we've helped a ton of people moving to the Portland metro area buy new construction, including in this development here on Bull Mountain. And like I mentioned, there's about a half a dozen builders building this area. Who you buy from really makes a big difference as far as the process, you know, going through their steps, working with the builder. From what we've seen and from what we've heard, the quality is going to be different. Overall, again, just the experience is going to be different. Some of the pricing is going to vary as well. So that's definitely something that we can talk to you about. If you are thinking about moving to Portland and you're looking for new construction specifically, this area could definitely be on the list, and we can talk more about the process and what that looks like. And if you are thinking about moving to Portland, and if you want to talk more about Bull Mountain, areas that are similar, if you want to talk more about what the process is like, give us a call, send us a text, shoot us an email, or click the link down below in the description of the video and schedule a Zoom call with us. We can talk more about it. You know, when I come out to film different areas, I will put some different points on the map, go there, you know, use those as spots to kind of walk around and film. They're not always places that I've spent a ton of time. So this is an area called Sunrise Park, really right at the top of Bull Mountain. And I was like, oh, it looks like a nice green space, be a nice place to walk around, kind of show some of the access to natural areas on Bull Mountain. Well, I got here and it looks like this park has actually closed. Looks like they're building a reservoir. At first I thought maybe they were building some homes, and maybe they are. This is a huge piece of land, a huge property in here. So I don't know exactly what's going on, but you can at least see some of the views. So this would be kind of facing east. Now when you look online, it says Bull Mountain is only about 2 square miles. If you look at the map, if you look at Google, it shows Bull Mountain's boundaries is covering like half of Tigard, which is going to be more like 6 square miles. So I think Google is lying. When you're on Bull Mountain, you know it, because the topography here, it's actually a big mountain. And all sides of Bull Mountain are developed. You know, you could be at the very top of the mountain, you could be on the east side, the west side, the north side, the south side, and where you are on Bull Mountain will determine or kind of dictate what it's going to be like as far as what's around you, where, you know, what your commute's going to look like, things like that. So if you're on the east side of Bull Mountain, you're going to be able to get to Highway 99, which is the main corridor going through Tigard, and then just east of there you're going to be able to get to I-5. So from I-5 you can get to Tualatin, Lake Oswego very easily, or north up into Portland. If you're on the north side of Bull Mountain, that's where you start to touch the Beaverton border. That's where you could actually be in the Beaverton School District potentially, and that's where you're going to be able to access Progress Ridge, which is in this area called Neighbors Southwest, and has similarly undergone a ton of development in the last 30 years, but most notably this big commercial kind of entertainment area called Progress Ridge, where you have restaurants and bars and a tap room and coffee shops and grocery stores, and there's the Big Owls, which is like a big family fun center. It's a great spot to take the kids, go bowling. I think there's some laser tag there. So on the north side of Bull Mountain, you can drop down into Progress Ridge very easily, and I imagine you would be spending a lot of time there. If you're on the west side of Bull Mountain, kind of southwest side, you're really touching that urban growth boundary. So you're going to be looking out into farmland and undeveloped land, which is actually really cool. I mean, it kind of creates this dynamic where you're in this relatively dense suburban area, really suburban area, but right there within your reach is this beautiful countryside. You start to get into some different wine regions, really starting west and then south of here you have at least a couple of different wine regions with wineries and wine tasting rooms and things like that, so that's really cool. Now I mentioned Bull Mountain is only about 2 square miles. There's about 10,000 people that live on Bull Mountain, and there's about 3,300 households, so it's a relatively dense area. Again, if you just look at 2 square miles, 10,000 people being in that area, relatively dense suburban feel. You do get some of those rural elements. Again, it's mostly going to be newer development, but you can get some one-off little streets and areas that are older, anywhere from 100 years to 50, 60, 70 years old. A lot of the older homes on Bull Mountain have a lot of land, you know, an acre, 2/3, a half an acre, 1/3 of an acre. And that's a pretty rare thing to get in an overall more newly developed area. All right, now I'm here at Progress Ridge, and this is not your typical strip mall by any means. I'm down here in the lower parking lot. There's more up here by where the movie theater is. There's also the Murray Hill kind of commercial area, which is just down Shoals Ferry a little bit. So, you know, between this Progress Ridge area and the Murray Hill area, this is a completely self-sustained community serving Neighbor Southwest, which is kind of technically where we are. But this over here is the north side of Bull Mountain. So anywhere you live on Bull Mountain, I mean, you could drop down here to Progress Ridge pretty easily. And so this is really nice to have, because otherwise Bull Mountain is really kind of buried. If you live in Tigard, if you live on Bull Mountain, you can get to Bridgeport Village pretty easily, but you still kind of have to wind through and fight traffic a little bit, despite it being, you know, not all that far away. The north side of Tigard also has Washington Square Mall. So here where I am at Progress Ridge, it's not really like a shopping mall necessarily. It's more like restaurants, little clinics. There's like a T-Mobile store. It really kind of has a good mix of things that you would need or want. But Washington Square Mall is a great mall that, living in Tigard, even living on Bull Mountain, you do have access to. But this is where you're going to be spending time for sure, because over on Highway 99 on the east side of Bull Mountain, you're really not going to get anything like this. It's going to be more like fast food, some grocery stores, some mechanics and things like that. Whereas there's enough here to actually, you know, come and enjoy an evening, come here on a weekend, spend some time, go to some shops, you know, go get some lunch, something like that. The boundaries of Bull Mountain are a little bit funny. Probably half of Bull Mountain is in Tigard city limits. And like I was saying earlier, the rest of it is unincorporated Washington County. About 20 years ago or so, Tigard actually tried to annex what is Bull Mountain, you know, for tax revenue and things like that. And there was actually a group that formed to fight against that. So that's probably, you know, always on the radar a little bit. I don't know if Bull Mountain were to be annexed into the city of Tigard, if that would make an enormous difference day to day. The fear would be that your taxes are going to increase, but city of Tigard versus unincorporated Washington County, property taxes are going to be pretty similar, you know, depending on the neighborhood, the size of the home, the age of the home, things like that. All right, so what are some of the pros and cons of living in Bull Mountain? It's a beautiful area, so there's no doubt about it. I think anybody would enjoy living in Bull Mountain. Not everybody is up for, you know, as suburban feeling of an area, but the scenery, the topography, kind of, you know, the hills, the views that you can get, the trees. There are some natural areas and green spaces, some trails kind of meandering and carved throughout the different developments throughout Bull Mountain. Objectively beautiful, a very, very nice area. I think you know, it's a quiet, peaceful suburb. It feels very safe. I think there's for sure people who have those things at the top of their list, and Bull Mountain is going to be as good as it gets. Definitely one of the top Portland suburban areas. I mean, Tigard as a whole is kind of a mixed bag, but Bull Mountain in particular in Tigard is going to be, you know, top 5 when it comes to just truly suburban, again, clean, safe, quiet, peaceful areas. Another great thing about Bull Mountain is that depending on the circumstance, for what you get, your dollar definitely goes a lot further. There's going to be areas that are similar to this. I'll talk more about this in a second, but areas like Bethany and Cedar Mill north of Highway 26, also unincorporated Washington County, but north of Beaverton, but even like Neighbor Southwest, which is kind of where I am right now. This Progress Ridge area is like between Neighbor Southwest and Bull Mountain, Tualatin. There's going to be areas that by and large are going to be a little pricier than what you can get on Bull Mountain. And I think in part it's because of the fact that you are a little bit buried. So I'll talk more about that too. But it seems like in Bull Mountain, you're going to get something like a 10% discount for a very comparable home to, you know, say the same house like in Tualatin, for example. So overall, by and large, you know, you can get these nice big suburban houses, 2,800, 3,000, 3,500 square feet, you know, 4 or 5 bedrooms, you know, bonus rooms, dens, offices, things like that. And you're going to be getting that on a price per square foot basis, you know, at a relative discount compared to very similar areas. There's a little bit of variety too. I mean, you can get some really, really nice big upscale homes where you're going to definitely have to push up over $1 million, but you know, the same house on Bull Mountain that might be 1.1, 1.2 million might be 1.3, 1.4 plus in a similar feeling community. Maybe that's a little bit closer to Portland, for example, or maybe that just has a little bit better amenities or access to the highway, for example. So what are some of the downsides of living on Bull Mountain? If you don't like suburbia, Bull Mountain's definitely not going to be for you. So, you know, we can just come out and say that there's a certain type of person looking for a certain type of setting that's going to love Bull Mountain. And I've alluded to it already in this video probably a couple times, that it's just the access and the location where you are in the Portland metro area is really not all that convenient. Now, if you work at Nike or somewhere on the west side in Beaverton and kind of the Silicon Forest and that tech corridor, it's not going to be all that bad. Now you're going to be taking some back roads and things like that that still can get backed up because a lot of people are taking that route because there's really not a freeway necessarily or big highway that runs, you know, north up into Beaverton, Hillsborough. You can get on Roy Rogers Road, you kind of have to get out then to get back in potentially depending on where you're working. If you work in downtown Portland or on the east side of the river in particular, or if you see yourself getting into Portland on a regular basis, and again, especially on the east side of Portland, getting up to Blazer games, things like that, Bull Mountain can be a really, really tough commute. You know, Highway 99 is kind of the straightest shot north into Portland, but you're hitting a lot of stoplights. It gets really, really backed up. So I think where you are, you know, the location, the immediate area and the setting is beautiful. You do have areas like Progress Ridge here that you can access, but you really got to look at what your commute is going to look like and what it's going to be like getting up into Portland if that's something you need to do or see yourself doing on a regular basis. Now, another downside is that maybe you are facing annexation at some point in the future. Maybe that really changes the dynamic of what you're paying in terms of property taxes or things like that. I don't know what the prospect of that looks like, and that may never happen, but the threat is there for sure. There's a precedent for that, at least an attempt to make that happen. I guess another downside, and this is going to be true of a lot of suburban areas of the era from the 90s, 2000s, really 80s, 90s, 2000s on, is that you get a lot of density. You get really small lots, houses are a little bit close together, you have a little bit less room to breathe. Now, a lot of these developments are, you know, made in a way where there's kind of only one or two ways in and out of the neighborhood. You have cul-de-sacs and things like that, so you get the privacy. You know, it feels very safe, great for kids. You know, I think a lot of people envision the cul-de-sac with the basketball hoop and all the kids are playing. You'll get a ton of that here, but you're also kind of on top of your neighbors a little bit, which some people may not necessarily love, and there's not a ton of opportunity to not have that type of dynamic unless you're in one of the older homes on Bull Mountain where you can get like a quarter acre all the way up to an acre potentially. So really, for the most part on Bull Mountain, what you see is what you get. I think looking around, driving around, you can pretty quickly get the gist of what type of area this is, what it might be like living in the types of communities and developments that are on Bull Mountain. If you like this area, maybe the location's not perfect, or maybe you just want to keep your options open, this neighbor southwest area of Beaverton, just north of here, as well as Sexton Mountain, which is just a little bit north of neighbor southwest, but a little bit further west, still pretty buried west in the metro area, but very similar feel. You have some elevation, you know, you have a lot of character in terms of the landscape. If you're looking a little bit further, something like Bethany or Cedar Mill on the north side of Highway 26 could really be a good fit. Tualatin, Tigard's bitter rival, could also check some boxes for you, and it's not all that far. A benefit of being in Tualatin versus Bull Mountain is Tualatin is right on I-5, so further south, but to get on the freeway and to get north up into Portland, or to get to 217 and then up into Beaverton, pretty straightforward. There's also a neighborhood in Tigard called Southview, which is just on the east side of Highway 99, and a lot of Southview, you can get some really nice views and you're at some relative elevation like you are in Bull Mountain. So in Southview, you can actually get some south-facing views, obviously. You can kind of look back to the west, north a little bit, and you can see Bull Mountain right there. So Southview is a really interesting area, and there's a couple neighborhoods in Southview that are going to have a similar feel to what you'll get in Bull Mountain. You're just there on the other side of 99, which gives you quicker access to I-5. At any rate, there's definitely going to be some areas in Portland, on the west side of Portland, that will be similar. You could even look to Happy Valley on the east side of the river as well, where you'll get a similar dynamic as far as the suburbia feel of Bull Mountain. If Bull Mountain is an area that sounds interesting to you, if you want to learn more about Bull Mountain or areas that are similar, give us a call, send us a text, shoot us an email, click the link down below in the description of the video, schedule a Zoom call with us, and we can dig into that some more. If this video is helpful, make sure to hit the like button. That helps us out a lot. If you want to get more videos like this, make sure to hit the subscribe button, tap the little bell to get notified every time we drop a new video. As always, we really appreciate you watching, and until next time, we'll talk to you later.